The salty air of the Caribbean was heavy with the promise of a storm, a fitting backdrop for the fate of Isabella de Leon. Clad in a silk dress now soiled with mud and despair, she was a prisoner on a ship bound for the slave markets of Tortuga. Her betrothal to a cruel Spanish nobleman was meant to secure her family's wealth, but her inability to bear children had made her an outcast, and now a commodity. The ship, the Serafina, was a lumbering merchant vessel, its crew a mix of grim-faced sailors and hardened guards. A sudden, jarring boom echoed across the water, followed by another. The Serafina shook, and the deck was thrown into chaos. "Pirates!" a sailor screamed, his voice a frantic mixture of fear and adrenaline. The vessel that had appeared on the horizon, a dark shadow against the tempestuous sky, was now unmistakably close. It was a brigantine, its sails black as pitch, and flying a flag that sent a shiver down even the most jaded spine, a skull with a coiled snake wrapped around its bones. It was the mark of Captain Jack, the Hangman Sparrow. Jack Sparrow was a name whispered with a mix of dread and grudging respect across the seven seas, not because of a whimsical nature, but for the ruthless efficiency with which he dispatched his enemies. He was a storm unto himself, a man whose face was a roadmap of scars, and whose eyes held the cold emptiness of a man who had seen too much. He had no grand philosophy, only a simple, brutal code. Take what you want, and let nothing stand in your way. The pirates swarmed the Serafina, a maelstrom of cutlasses and muskets. Isabella was dragged from the hold and thrown onto the deck, her chains rattling against the splintered wood. The sight that greeted her was one of pure chaos, a dance of steel and blood under a darkening sky. And then she saw him. He was not a caricature of a pirate, he was a force of nature. His long black coat, his rugged boots, and the sharp, calculating gaze that swept over the carnage. He looked at her, and for a moment, his eyes, usually so devoid of warmth, seemed to pause. "What's this?" Jack's voice was a low growl carrying the grit of the sea. "A damsel in distress? We don't get much of that round here." The captain of the Serafina, a portly man with a trembling chin, stepped forward. "She's a noble woman, sir. A special cargo." Jack's gaze remained fixed on Isabella. He saw the genuine terror in her eyes, but also a flicker of defiance. A storm of rain began to fall, drenching them all. The deck became slick, the fighting more desperate. One of Jack's crew, a burly man named Silas, was about to take her and toss her into the brig when she acted. Driven by a desperation that overcame her fear, Isabella took a stumbling step forward, her chains clanking. She lifted her chin, her eyes meeting Jack's. "I'm Isabella de Leon. My family cast me out because I cannot bear a child. They intend to sell me to a man who will use me as a slave for his ambitions. Please, you must save me." Her voice was soft but held an unyielding strength. Jack's men laughed, a coarse, ugly sound that cut through the rain. He didn't. He looked at her, and the coldness in his eyes seemed to deepen. "Save you? Why should I? There's no profit in a worthless woman." "I am not worthless," she cried out, the rain plastering her hair to her face. "If you save me, I will be your bride. I will be yours forever. I'll share all my family's hidden fortunes with you, but you must save me now, before they sell me to a man worse than death." The words hung in the air, a reckless gamble in the heart of a storm. The crew fell silent. The thought of an arranged marriage, a noble woman's fortune, was beyond the usual pirate's grab. Jack's gaze narrowed, his mind racing through possibilities. Was it a lie? A desperate plea? Or was there a flicker of truth in her eyes that could change his course? A woman in chains, a strange promise, and the relentless rain of the Caribbean. The storm was coming, and with it, a new and unexpected course for Captain Jack Sparrow. The promise was an anchor, a heavy, unspoken burden that Captain Sparrow had reluctantly accepted. He hadn't agreed to marry her, not in so many words, but the fact that he hadn't sold her to the highest bidder at the bustling slave market in Tortuga was a silent testament to her words. Instead, Isabella was now a permanent fixture on his ship, the Black Serpent. She was no longer in chains, but she was far from free. Her quarters were a small, damp cabin, a cage of sorts, and her days were spent under the watchful and often resentful eyes of the crew. The Black Serpent was a stark, efficient vessel, its deck a place of hard work and harder men. The crew, a mix of weathered veterans and young ruffians, saw Isabella as a symbol of their captain's inexplicable weakness. Silas, the quartermaster, was the most vocal. "She's bad luck, Captain," he'd grumble. "A woman on a ship, a sterile one at that. She'll bring a curse upon us all." Jack ignored the whispers, but they were a constant nagging presence. He spent his days in the same manner as always, navigating treacherous waters, raiding merchant ships, and maintaining a strict, brutal discipline. Yet he found himself increasingly aware of Isabella's presence. He saw her on the deck, observing the crew, her face a mix of fear and curiosity. He watched her as she tended to the sick and wounded, her gentle hands a stark contrast to the rough reality of their lives. One evening, as a golden sunset painted the sky, Jack found her on the deck, her back against the mast, staring at the distant horizon. "What are you looking at?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. Isabella flinched but didn't turn. "The sunset. It reminds me of home, of Spain, the way the light hits the water. It's the only thing on this ship that isn't grey." "Life at sea ain't for pretty colours," Jack grunted. "It's for survival. Survival or escape," she retorted, her voice low. "You're a pirate, Captain. You take what you want. But what are you running from?" The question hit a nerve. Jack's eyes hardened. "I ain't running from nothing. I'm living the only life a man like me can live." "Perhaps you could live another," Isabella said, finally turning to face him. "The one where you fulfill your promise." "What promise?" Jack snapped. "I never said I'd marry you." "But you didn't sell me," she countered, her gaze unwavering. "You saved me from a fate worse than death. That, Captain, is a promise in itself. You may not be a man of faith, but I believe in what you did. It showed me a part of you that isn't just about steel and blood." Jack stared at her, the setting sun reflecting in his eyes. He saw not a frightened girl, but a woman with an inner strength that he hadn't anticipated. Her words were a subtle challenge, a mirror held up to his brutal existence. Was there a part of him that was more than just the hangman? The Black Serpent was a world away from the refined courts of Spain, a world of dirt, sweat, and constant danger. The crew's resentment towards Isabella grew. One night, a brutal fight broke out in the galley between a few men. Jack's stern gaze was enough to break it up, but the reason was clear: jealousy, and the whispers of her being a bad omen. The next morning, the ship's supply of fresh water was found to have been sabotaged. The barrels emptied into the sea, the crew's temper flared, and all eyes turned to Isabella. "It's her fault," Silas bellowed. "She's cursed us. We'll all die of thirst because of this witch." The crew, thirsty and angry, began to close in on her. Jack stepped forward, his hand on the hilt of his cutlass. "Stand down!" he roared, his voice cutting through the tense air. "No one touches her." "But, Captain," Silas pleaded, "the water—" "I know," Jack said, his eyes scanning the horizon. He knew he had a difficult choice to make. He could placate his crew by casting her aside, or he could stand by the woman who had stirred something within him. The promise she had made was now his to keep. "We will find water," he announced, his voice filled with an uncharacteristic resolve. "Until then, we will ration. And if I find out who did this, they will hang from the mast. Now, get back to work, all of you." The crew grumbled but dispersed. Jack turned to Isabella, who was watching him with a mixture of fear and awe. The sun was now fully set, and the stars began to appear. Jack realized that she was no longer just a woman in chains. She was a burden, yes, but also a beacon. Her promise had become his responsibility, and in that moment he realized he was changing. He was not just saving her. He was saving himself from the darkness he had long embraced. The need for fresh water forced the Black Serpent into dangerous waters, a channel patrolled by the British Royal Navy. The crew's morale was low and mutiny was brewing. They blamed Isabella, believing her presence was the cause of their misfortune. Suddenly, a British frigate appeared on the horizon. Its captain, Commander Hayes, a man known for his hatred of pirates. Panic erupted on the Black Serpent. Silas, the quartermaster, tried to incite a mutiny, but Jack stood firm. "You're a fool, Silas," Jack said, his voice calm. "That frigate was coming no matter what, and you'll not use a woman as an excuse for your cowardice." With a swift move, Jack disarmed Silas, putting an end to the mutiny. As the battle began, Jack fought with a ferocity his crew hadn't seen in years. He was no longer just fighting for survival, he was fighting for a promise he had made. During the chaos, Isabella found her own purpose. She moved through the bloody deck, tending to the wounded and providing comfort. She was no longer a captive but a part of the crew. When Commander Hayes boarded the Black Serpent, he recognized Isabella. "Isabella de Leon," he sneered. "I'll take you back to your betrothed and see you pay for this." Jack stepped in front of her, his cutlass raised. "She's with me now, Hayes, and you'll not lay a hand on her." The duel was fierce. Jack, fueled by a purpose he had never known, fought for the unspoken trust between them. He disarmed Hayes, forcing the commander to retreat. The Vigilance, defeated, limped away, leaving the pirates victorious. After the battle, a humbled Silas approached Jack. "Captain," he said, "I was wrong. She's not a curse, she's our luck." Jack simply nodded. He looked at Isabella as she tended to his wounds. "You saved me," she whispered. For the first time since their meeting, a genuine smile touched his lips. "It seems," he said, his voice filled with tenderness, "that the sterile woman in chains has found a way to bring new life to a man who thought he had none left. So, tell me, Isabella, will you still be my bride forever?" "I will, now and always." Jack had not just found a woman, he had found a reason. His redemption came not from a change in his life's path, but from a change in his heart, a life no longer defined by what he took, but by what he chose to protect. If you enjoyed this story of a pirate's redemption, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more epic adventures.